Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to unpack a really bold proposal. It's called Tax Billionaires' Wealth Free the 95%. Now, this document argues that extreme wealth is a huge problem for democracy, and it offers a pretty radical solution. So, let's just dive right in.
The whole proposal is really built around this one powerful idea, captured in a quote from Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. We can have democracy, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. The document we're breaking down today basically argues that America has reached that exact crossroads.
So, with that pretty stark choice in mind, let's take a look at the first part of the proposal, which is all about its diagnosis of what it calls America's democratic dilemma.
Okay, so the core premise is this. Extreme wealth, when it's concentrated in a few hands, directly threatens democracy. The source points a finger at the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United ruling. You'll remember this. It's what allowed corporations and unions to spend unlimited money on elections. The document claims this just accelerated the trend, and that this flood of cash has basically bent democracy to serve the needs of a select few.
0.00026%. That's a tiny number, right? Well, according to this proposal, that tiny fraction of the population represents America's wealthiest individuals. And the claim is that this group now holds a completely disproportionate amount of political power, which is fueling what the document calls an inequality crisis.
So after laying out the problem, the proposal shifts to its solution, a very clear two-step plan.
And here's the plan in a nutshell. Step 1. Introduce a wealth tax specifically designed to, well, downsize the massive fortunes of billionaires. Then, Step 2. Take all that new revenue and use it to completely eliminate federal income taxes for the vast majority of Americans while also funding some major social programs.
All right, so how would this tax actually work? Let's break down the numbers and the mechanics of it all.
Now, the crucial point here is that this is a marginal tax. That's a really important distinction. What it means is that the first $1 billion of a person's wealth is completely exempt, totally safe. After that, the rates only apply to the wealth within each specific tier. So, for example, if someone has $2 billion, they'd only pay that 10% tax on their second billion, not on their entire fortune. And what's the result of these tax rates? Well, according to the proposal's own calculations, this tax would raise an estimated $2.23 trillion, and that's just in its very first year.
To try and put a number that huge into perspective, the source points out that this single-year revenue is more than double the Pentagon's entire budget, and it's nearly a third of the whole U.S. federal budget. It's a lot of money.
Okay, so that's how the money is raised. But where would it all go? The next part of the proposal lays out a very specific plan for redirecting all that revenue.
The plan's number one priority is really clear. The first $700 billion raised would be used to completely eliminate federal income taxes for about 95% of Americans, specifically anyone earning less than $200,000 a year.
So, what about the rest? Well, that still leaves over $1.5 trillion. And the proposal lists a number of really ambitious social programs that could be funded with what's left over. Things like Medicare for all, free public college, and even extending the solvency of Social Security.
Of course, a plan this radical is going to face some serious criticism, right? To its credit, the document actually raises several potential objections and then offers its own counterarguments.
First up is the big one, the legal question. Is a direct tax on someone's wealth even allowed under the U.S. Constitution?
The proposal's answer is that, yeah, it would probably be challenged, but legal standards aren't set in stone. The authors point to things like Social Security and major civil rights laws. Both faced huge constitutional hurdles at first, but were eventually upheld as society's standards evolved.
Okay, next up is the practical political reality. I mean, could a bill like this ever actually become law?
On this point, the document looks to history. It argues that a lot of things we take for granted now were once considered totally impossible. You know, things like American independence or landing on the moon. The point they're making is that what seems politically impossible is often just a temporary state of affairs.
Then there's the question about the personal impact. What does this actually mean for the day-to-day lives of the people who would be paying this tax?
The document's answer here is a very firm no. It stresses again that the first $1 billion is completely untouched. It also brings up polling data suggesting that most Americans think $1 billion is, well, more than enough for anyone to live on, no matter how lavishly.
And finally, the fourth objection, if you're taxing these massive fortunes away, won't your source of revenue eventually just dry up?
And this is where the proposal kind of reframes its own objective. It argues that the main goal isn't actually to raise money forever. The real goal is to reduce the concentration of wealth, which it sees as the source of that outsized political power. So from that perspective, shrinking revenue isn't a failure. It would actually be a sign of success.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The entire document, with all its charts, its numbers, and its arguments, is ultimately asking this one single provocative question. It frames the debate not just as an economic policy, but as a fundamental choice about the kind of society and the kind of government we really want to have.